Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Uncomplimentary, a production of Theology Thursday. I am Pastor Chris Laughlin of Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Allegan, Michigan, and I am joined, as always, by my stalwart companion, friend, and colleague, Pastor James Smith of Saron Lutheran Church in St. Joseph. And how are you holding up today, Pastor James?
Well, I'm good, but I have a feeling I'm about to get a lot more uneasy in a minute.
I hope so, because this is not an easy topic. We will often have some kind of funny hook. We've talked about it. We can't figure out how to make this funny. So, Pastor James, um, where are we going today?
Well, I think we wanted to talk about the common saying you hear, God never gives you more than you can handle. And today we are going to ask, does God ever give you more than you can handle?
Well, and that question then is based on this really tough story from Genesis 22, which you call I think Sundays in Season calls it the testing of Abraham. Christian tradition has called it the sacrifice of Isaac. The Jewish tradition calls it the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. And it's just a terrible story. And it kind of feels like, or it might have felt like to Abraham and Isaac, like they were being given
Yeah.
more than they could handle.
Yeah. So it picks up probably 13, 15, 17 years somewhere in there after our story from last week about the birth of Isaac. He's grown. Importantly, Ishmael is out of the house at this point, as we have heard. I Isaac is still Abraham's only child. When suddenly God tells him to go up on the mountain and sacrifice him as a burnt offering.
Which, just to be clear, means that he would literally kill his son and then burn him as an offering to God.
Yep.
And that's
So
God's instruction.
So we told you this is a terrible story, and it gets terribler along the way because it's a several day walk up this mountain. And at one point, there's a heartbreaking moment where Isaac asks his father, I see the wood, I see the fuel, but where is the animal for the sacrifice? And Abraham says,
He says, God will provide, my son.
right. Um, but I wonder to what extent either of them believes it at this point. Clearly, Isaac is starting to ask him some good questions. Abraham is saying the words, he's doing the actions, but I don't think he can see how this is going to end. Do you?
We don't actually hear like any kind of internal monologue. And Abraham, the text never indicates that Abraham hesitates.
Right? So,
The action sort of slows down at a couple of points, but we sort of get a bird's eye view of this. We don't know what's going on inside their heads. We do know that God is very insistent. Your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac. There's
yeah,
no wheedling out of this one.
exactly.
And there's the acknowledgement that this is going to suck.
Yeah, not because there's not only the very human cost and the relationship cost, but again, he's been promised many descendants, and at age 117 or so, or however old he is, it certainly does not look likely that there will be another one. So he's really being asked to give up everything. Isaac, of course, is unknowingly being asked to give up his very self, and so they walk up the mountain. And at the last second, Abraham is told not to do it. There's a ram in the thicket who gets offered instead.
And it's
Um,
important to note that I mean, when Pastor James says the last second, he means like the kid's bound, the wood is laid, he's
yep.
raised the knife to slaughter his son. It looks like this is going to happen.
Yeah, so I would say this to us is a very disturbing story, and we know how it ends. But in the story, you have to imagine that for several days they do not know how it ends, and I think that spreads some light on this question of does God ever give you more than you can handle? Because um, the Bible paints these stories of Genesis in big letters and bright colors. What could be more than you can handle other than sacrificing Isaac? Uh, but on a smaller level, like all of us probably go through times in our lives where it does feel like there's more than we can handle, and it doesn't feel we can't see a way out.
Right. And again, the story has a happy ending, although I'm not exactly sure how happy
Yeah.
it is. Um, and we do get this, the Lord will provide, and the Lord does provide, and it's still disturbing. Like,
Yeah.
what a one! This is one heck of a test.
Yeah. Later on, Paul will reflect a bit on this story, but in this passage I'm going to quote, he's talking about the Old Testament as a whole, and he sums it up. He says, um, no testing has overtaken you, speaking to the Corinthians, that is not common to everyone. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tested beyond your strength. But with the testing, he will also provide the way out so that you may be able to endure it. And
And it,
that sometimes glibly, in my opinion, gets translated as justification for God never gives you more than you can handle. But I don't think that's quite what's being said. Do you, Pastor Chris?
no, he will not let you be tested beyond your strength. But what does that mean? Like, but with the testing, he will also provide the way out so that you may be able to endure it. It just is not factually accurate to say that whatever doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. Sometimes whatever doesn't kill you cripples you.
Right.
Uh, just think about like polio when we had to deal with that, or what sometimes we're still dealing with that. Anyway, um, and sometimes the way out is death. And we are talking about matters of life, death, and resurrection.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I think that's ultimately the answer the New Testament gives us is that the the resurrection is God's answer. And uh, sometimes that is tough. Not to put it lightly. Um, but the idea that we always need to tell ourselves to strengthen ourselves. God will never give me anything more than we can handle. No, we're not putting our confidence in ourselves, but in the God who raises the dead. Um,
precisely.
and so the answer to this story ultimately ends up not being a ram or the thicket, but who God is. And even when God appeared to be asking something terrible, uh, God was faithful in the end, and we experience that in Jesus.
Well said, Pastor James.